When I practiced law, I spent years in a courtroom where every word mattered. Every pause, every glance, every question. It all had weight. And what I learned, there wasn't just how to argue a case. It was how to handle people, how to diffuse tension, how to get someone to listen when they were angry, how to hold respect in a room full of chaos. And the beautiful thing is, those skills don't just belong in a courtroom. They belong in your everyday life, at home, at work, in your marriage, with your kids, with your boss, with yourself. And I want you to hear this: you don't need a law degree to do it. You don't need a gavel or a black robe or a jury sitting in front of you. You need a few tools that I carried out of the courtroom. And I promise you, when you put them into practice, you'll see conversations shift. You'll feel tension break. You'll watch walls come down. So let's get into the first trick, because it's simple, but it's a game changer, and that's mastering the pause. In court, silence was a weapon. And I don't mean silence like avoiding the fight. I mean silence like knowing when to stop talking, knowing when to let something sit. Because here's the truth: people rush to fill silence, and when they do, you learn what's really going on. You hear the thing they didn't plan to say. You get past their rehearsed defense and into the truth. Now, translate that to your life. You're in an argument with your spouse. They're throwing words at you like darts. You feel the heat in your chest. You want to fire back. But what happens if, instead of lashing out, you pause, you breathe, you let the silence hang for a moment? Suddenly, the dynamic shifts. They notice you're not attacking. They notice you're not interrupting. They notice you're actually listening. And sometimes in that quiet space, they'll keep talking. And in that next sentence, that's where the real truth is. See, most of us think arguments are won by who talks louder or faster. But in reality, the strongest person in the room is often the quietest, the one who doesn't let their emotions run the show, the one who uses silence like punctuation. That's a courtroom trick, and it works in your living room just as well as it does in front of a jury. I'll give you a story. I once had a case where the witness was on the stand, and he was confident, polished. He had his story down. But I didn't argue with him. I didn't rush. I asked a question, and then I stopped. I let the silence hang, and you could see it, the confidence start to crack, because silence makes people uncomfortable. And in that discomfort, he started filling the air with extra details. And that's where the truth slipped out. That's where I got what I needed. Now, in your life, that might not be a witness on the stand. It might be your teenager who insists they're fine. And instead of hammering them with questions, you say, "Okay, I hear you." And then you pause. You don't jump in. You don't fill the silence with your own fear. And then maybe a minute later, they open up to, "Actually, I had a rough day." That's the power of the pause. It's not about being manipulative. It's about creating space. Space for truth, space for connection, space for the other person to meet you halfway. And if you practice that one tool, just holding a pause instead of rushing to fill every gap, you'll watch your conversations change. Now let's roll into the second trick, because it builds right on top of this. And that's framing the narrative. In a courtroom, whoever frames the story usually wins the case. Because facts by themselves, they're just pieces of information. But the way you put them together, that's what makes people believe. That's what makes people lean forward. That's what makes people say, "Yes, I get it. That makes sense." And the same thing is true in your everyday conversations. If you're arguing with someone and all you're doing is throwing facts at them, "You said this, you did that," you never follow through. They shut down because it feels like an attack. But if you frame the narrative, you guide the way the story is told. And you do it in a way that pulls them in instead of pushing them away. Let me give you an example. In a courtroom, if I said, "The defendant entered the house unlawfully," that's dry. That's legal language. But if I said, imagine sitting in your living room late at night and hearing the sound of a window breaking behind you. Imagine the fear that shoots through your chest as you realize someone's in your home. Now suddenly it's a story, it's a picture, it's human, and people lean in. You can do the same thing in your relationships. Instead of saying, "You never listen to me," you reframe it. When I'm sharing something important and I feel like I'm not being heard, I start to feel invisible. And when I feel invisible, I pull away. And I don't want to pull away from you. See the difference. One sounds like an attack. The other sounds like an invitation. You're framing the narrative in a way that makes the other person see the story through your eyes. Here's another example. You're negotiating a raise at work. Instead of walking in and saying, "I deserve more money," you frame it. "Over the last year, I've taken on X projects, increased revenue by Y%, and stepped into leadership roles that help the team succeed. I'd like to discuss how my compensation can reflect that growth." Same facts, different frame, and the frame makes all the difference. This trick works everywhere. With your kids, you don't say, "You're irresponsible with your homework." You say, "I know how smart you are, and I've seen you handle tough things before." When you avoid your assignments, it doesn't show your potential, and I don't want you selling yourself short. Now you're framing the story around their ability, not their failure. And here's the beautiful thing. When you frame the narrative, you're not just telling your side. You're helping the other person step into it. You're painting a picture they can walk into. And once they're in the picture, they see it differently. They feel it differently. Let's go to the third courtroom trick. This one is called objection relevance. If you've ever watched a courtroom drama, you've seen this moment. Someone on the witness stand starts rambling. The lawyer jumps up and says, "Objection, relevance, Your Honor." What are they really saying? They're saying, this doesn't matter to the case. This isn't moving the jury closer to the truth. This isn't helpful. And the judge either sustains it or overrules it. Now, how does that apply to you and me in our everyday conversations? Here's how you've got to start mentally raising your own objections when the conversation is heading into irrelevant, unproductive, or damaging territory. Because think about it, how many arguments in your life have gone off the rails, not because of the issue itself, but because the two of you dragged in 10 years of unrelated history. He brings up that time you forgot to call him back in 2018. She brings up that time you said something snarky in front of her friends 3 years ago. Suddenly, you're not talking about the bills or the parenting decision or the weekend plans. You're on trial for your entire relationship history. This is where the objection relevance trick becomes gold. When someone drags in something that has nothing to do with the matter at hand, you have a choice. You can bite, you can chase that rabbit hole, you can defend yourself against all the irrelevant charges, or you can pause, breathe, and raise an internal objection. You can say out loud if necessary, okay, but how is that relevant to what we're talking about right now? That's powerful. You know why? Because it cuts the clutter. It stops the emotional avalanche before it crushes both of you. In a courtroom, that objection saves the jury from being confused by details that don't matter. In your relationships, it saves you from wasting emotional energy on tangents that have nothing to do with solving the actual problem. Let me give you a real-world scenario. You and your spouse are arguing about household chores. You're saying, "I feel like I'm doing more of the cleaning." And instead of addressing that, they go, "Well, you're always on your phone when I'm trying to talk to you." Now, is that maybe true? Sure. Is it relevant to the chore conversation? No, that's a whole different discussion. And if you chase that tangent, you'll be fighting about screen time instead of cleaning, and nothing gets resolved. But if you calmly say, "I hear that you feel I'm distracted on my phone sometimes," That's fair. But can we stay on the cleaning topic right now? Because that's the issue we're trying to fix. You've just done two things. One, you've acknowledged their feeling without letting it hijack the conversation. Two, you've put the guardrails back on the road. That's objection, relevance in action. Now, let's talk about why most people don't use this trick. Because they feel like they have to defend themselves every single time something is thrown at them. If someone says, "You never listen," we go, "Les, I do." If someone says, "You don't care about me," we go, "Of course I care about you." We chase every single accusation because it hits our ego, it hits our pride. And the conversation becomes this ping-pong match where neither person remembers what the original point even was. But think about a great trial lawyer. Do they chase every single irrelevant detail? No, they pick their battles. They know which points matter to the jury and which ones are distractions. And they cut the distractions ruthlessly. That's the mindset you need in everyday conversations. Here's a line you can use. It's straight out of the courtroom playbook, but I promise it works at home. I want to make sure we stick to what matters here. That's it. You don't have to sound combative. You don't have to say objection with a gavel. But that little redirect, spoken calmly, changes the entire temperature of the discussion. It says, "I'm here to solve, not to spiral." And let me just point out, this isn't about dismissing the other person's feelings. That's the mistake a lot of people make. They think, if I say, "That's not relevant," they'll feel invalidated. No, the trick is in how you do it. You can validate their emotion while still parking it for later. For example, "I hear that you're upset about that," and we can talk about it. But can we finish resolving this first? That's respect plus focus. That's relationship gold. And let's be honest, if you don't start doing this, your conversations will always get hijacked by the loudest emotion in the room. And the loudest emotion isn't always the most important issue. Sometimes it's just the noisiest, the most dramatic. And if you let drama dictate the direction, you're not solving problems, you're chasing fireworks. This trick also protects your peace, because irrelevant conversations aren't just time wasters, they're energy drainers. They leave you exhausted, like you just argued for 3 hours but resolved nothing. That's because you weren't actually debating the case, you were chasing irrelevant witnesses around the courtroom. And no one wins that. So I want you to imagine yourself as the judge in your own conversations. You get to say, "We're not admitting that into evidence right now." You get to decide what's worth debating and what's a distraction. That's not control, it's wisdom. That's you choosing clarity over chaos. And I'll tell you something personal. The first time I used this in my own marriage, it felt weird because I was so used to defending myself on everything. But the moment I said, "Babe, can we stay on this issue for now and circle back to that later?" You know what happened? The conversation calmed down. The heat dropped because suddenly it wasn't 10 arguments stacked on top of each other. It was one. One we could actually solve, and that's the win. That's what this whole trick is about, cutting away the irrelevant so the relevant can breathe. Now, let me show you another courtroom trick that absolutely works in everyday conversations, the art of redirecting the witness. If you've ever watched a skilled trial lawyer, you'll notice they don't waste energy fighting with every single objection, accusation, or irrelevant tangent. Instead, they redirect. They take the conversation from a place of chaos back to the point that matters most. And here's the beauty, you can do the exact same thing when someone in your life tries to drag you into an unproductive argument. Because let's be honest, we've all been there. Someone says something out of anger, frustration, or even manipulation, and suddenly you feel pulled into defending yourself, explaining yourself, or chasing after every little word they throw at you. It's exhausting, right? You end up talking in circles, saying things you don't even mean, and at the end of it, nothing is solved. That's what happens when we let the other person control the courtroom of the conversation. But if you learn how to redirect, suddenly you're not chasing the noise anymore. You're guiding the discussion back to clarity, focus, and resolution. Think about it like this. In a courtroom, not every question deserves an answer. Some questions are designed to trip you up. Some are distractions. Some are pure theater. The lawyer's job isn't to win every small skirmish. It's to keep the jury focused on what matters. And in your personal relationships, that's exactly your job too. If someone throws an accusation like, "You never care about me," you don't need to argue about the word never. You don't need to defend your track record like you're building a case file of evidence. What you need is to redirect, to take the heat out of the broad accusation and bring the conversation back to what's real and solvable. For example, it sounds like you're feeling uncared for. Tell me what's making you feel that way. Do you see what just happened there? You didn't chase the exaggeration. You redirected it toward the actual issue. That's powerful. That's influence. That's leadership in your conversations. Now, I can already hear the pushback. But Jefferson, if I don't respond to the exaggeration, aren't I letting them get away with it? No. What you're doing is refusing to play a game that has no winner. If someone is venting, exaggerating, or throwing emotional fire, they're not looking for your defense. They're looking for acknowledgement, clarity, and a way forward. By redirecting, you're not surrendering, you're steering. And steering is always more powerful than spinning. Let's break this down with a few real life scenarios. Picture this: you're in a heated conversation with your partner. They blurt out, "You're always on your phone, you never listen to me." Now, in that moment, your instinct might be to defend. "That's not true. I listen all the time," or "I was just answering a work email." But notice what happens when you go down that road. You end up arguing over exceptions. You're debating statistics in a moment that has nothing to do with numbers. You're stuck. But if you redirect, "Okay, I hear that you feel I'm not listening. What would help you feel more heard right now?" You've moved from defense to direction. Suddenly, the energy shifts. The fight isn't about the word always anymore. It's about finding a solution. Or imagine you're at work and a colleague says in a meeting, "This project is a mess because you didn't do your part." Now, you could fire back. "That's not true. I did my part," but then you're stuck in a public back and forth. What if instead you said, "I hear your concern. Let's focus on what needs to get done to move this project forward." That's redirection. You're not taking the bait. You're showing composure. And here's the bonus: everyone else in the room notices. They see that you don't crumble under pressure. They see that you're not easily provoked. And that earns respect in a way no defensive argument ever could. The deeper lesson here is that not every conversational punch deserves a counterpunch. Sometimes the strongest move is the pivot, the ability to catch the energy being thrown at you and turn it towards something constructive. It's not avoidance. It's not weakness. It's strategy. It's keeping your eyes on the bigger picture instead of getting lost in the weeds. And here's something you need to remember: redirection isn't about silencing the other person. It's about bringing the conversation back to where growth and resolution actually live. People often argue in extremes because they don't feel heard. When you redirect, you're actually giving them a chance to be heard in a way that matters. You're moving past the smokescreen of always and never, and into the reality of what they actually need. That's connection. That's progress. Now, let's zoom out for a second. Why is this so important? Because in everyday life, whether it's with your partner, your kids, your boss, or your friends, conversations can spiral fast. Someone throws in a jab, someone else takes the bait, and before you know it, The entire interaction is derailed. Redirection is your anchor. It's your way of saying, I'm not going to let this conversation get hijacked. I'm not going to let emotions or exaggerations take us off course. I'm going to guide this back to what matters. And when you practice this consistently, people start to feel safer talking to you. They trust that you won't get lost in the drama. They know you'll keep things focused, calm, and productive. That's how you become the kind of person everyone wants in their corner. One more example, because I really want this to sink in. Imagine you're talking to your teenager and they say, "You don't care about me, you just care about your work." Now, if you argue, "That's not true, I care about you more than anything," it won't land. Why? Because they're not in a logical place. They're in an emotional place. So instead of defending, redirect. It sounds like you're feeling second place to my work. I don't want you to feel that way. Can you tell me what I can do differently to help you feel prioritized? That's how you transform conflict into connection. You didn't fight their statement. You redirected their feelings toward a solution. That's emotional leadership. But here's the challenge. Most people don't tell the story. They argue the evidence. They say, "You never listen. You always interrupt. You didn't show up when you said you would." Those are evidence points. And while they might be true, they don't land. They don't move people. They trigger people. Because no one likes being cross-examined in their own home. No one likes to feel like they're under trial in a friendship or relationship. What they respond to is how it feels, not the tally sheet of wrongs. So instead of cross-examining, narrate. Instead of saying, "You always cut me off," say, "When I try to share and I get interrupted, I feel like my words don't have space." Instead of saying, "You don't care about this relationship," say, "When I plan something special and it's brushed aside, the story I tell myself is that maybe I'm not as valued as I thought." Do you see how this changes the energy? The first way makes people armor up. The second way makes them pause. Now, I can almost hear someone say, "Jefferson, isn't this soft? Isn't this giving people a free pass?" No, this is not weakness. This is strategy. A trial lawyer doesn't tell a story because they're weak on facts. They tell a story because they know facts alone don't stick. They know a juror needs to feel something before they can believe something. And in conversations, it's the same. You can pile up facts all you want, but if someone's heart is closed, their mind won't budge. Your story is the key